police basically gave me a move on order. They said, unless you shut down everything, unless you go home, you're gonna get arrested. And I just said, listen, I believe in the right to freedom of speech. This is a conscience issue for me. I'm not going to resist arrest, but, you know, with respect, officer, you know, you're going to have to arrest me because I believe in freedom of speech. And they were like, okay, we will. And then they read out my rights. They didn't handcuff me because, like, as I said, man, I was not resisting arrest whatsoever. I was no violent threat whatsoever. I mean, I literally was just standing there with a sign. They took me over, put me in the paddy wagon. I got put in like this sort of steel cage at the back of the police wagon, and they drove me over to the local police station, fingerprinted me, got mug shots done. They wanted to do an interview without my lawyer present. I was like, no, not doing that. And then, like, I was there for like 5 hours. It was very cold. I was in like this steel cage sort of thing. And then, like, eventually they bailed me at like midnight. But like, the bail conditions were really ridiculous. They were saying you can't go back to Eastwood. You can't go back to this area where you're protesting. Otherwise, you'll be immediately arrested and actually held in jail. And obviously, I didn't have a lawyer present. It was midnight. I was cold, tired, hungry. I just wanted to go home, so I just signed the bail forms. But
they didn't feed you or give you any kind of accommodations?
Look, I'm not going to say I was mistreated. I mean, like, I was actually very lucky that some of the police officers, I think, actually were sympathetic to me and my cause. I think they were like, why have we arrested this guy? Why did the sergeant in charge, like, put him in a steel cage, like, when he's not doing anything wrong? So some of them were offering me like coffee and tea, and they let me read books I had in my bag when I got arrested, which, like, thank God, man, because I was so bored. I wasn't allowed to connect with the outside world. I was only allowed one phone call to my dad, and he was like so mad at me. He was like, what the hell's happening? And it was like 11 p.m. It was really close to midnight, and that was my one phone call, and he was so mad at me. And they don't let you go on your phone. You can't talk to anyone really. And I couldn't reach my lawyer because he was asleep, you know, Saturday night, nearly midnight. And so I was so bored. Thank God they let me read those books, man. I don't know how you do it like 5 hours in a steel cell without anything to do, just with your own thoughts. I was like, towards the end, it was pretty terrible. And I thought, yeah, I don't want to, like, you know, necessarily go to get in this situation again. But to me, this is about so much more than, you know, just one protest. It's more than just a sign, etc. Like, this is about freedom of expression. This is about such a fundamental value that underpins democratic society. And I mean, in Australia, we don't have a Bill of Rights. We don't have freedom of speech. It's explicitly protected in our Constitution. The High Court has found in the past there's an implied right to freedom of speech in the Constitution because, like, the Constitution sets out that we are a democracy, and the High Court justices were like, well, you can't have a democracy without some level of freedom of speech. But because it's not explicitly in there, I mean, it's quite, you know, there are grey areas. I mean, things like offending a political leader. I mean, is that covered by free speech? And obviously, in my case, it wasn't, because they arrested me, and like they've got a court date for me now, etc. So our current hope is, I'm very lucky. I've got one of the best barristers in Australia working for me, one of the best lawyers. He was made a QC, which is like, in Australia, when you're made a silk, means you're in the basically like top 10% of barristers. And he was like the youngest person made a silk in the 20th century in the entire Commonwealth. So I'm very lucky. I've got one of the best barristers in the country, Tony Morris QC. And Tony, he's representing me for free, and he's said to the New South Wales Police Force, we want a complete change to Drew's bail conditions. There should be no restrictions on him campaigning in the suburb of Eastwood alongside his fellow candidate, Kyinzom Dhongdue, as part of the election campaign. Because that's the another thing, man. Like, I mean, one thing to get arrested as a protester, which is really bad, but another thing, I'm actually running for election. I'm campaigning in the seat with our candidate in the election. I mean, I don't know how many times it's occurred where a Senate candidate, someone running for office in Australia, has been arrested in the course of campaigning because of something they put on a sign. I don't know if it's potentially unprecedented. So we think it's like it's got the potential to be this big precedent-setting case where, I mean, if we go to the High Court and we can get a change to my bail conditions, etc., and the High Court can rule that I was, you know, unfairly treated, etc., then it could be a precedent-setting case that may expand the scope of free speech, and that's what I really hope to happen. I mean, I believe so fundamentally in the right to freedom of speech, And I've faced a lot of threats and attacks over the past couple of years because of criticism I've made of this dictatorship. And I know obviously in China, there's no such thing as freedom of speech. If you criticize Xi Jinping in China, you'll end up in a ditch. And we believe in a democracy like Australia, we should be able to speak out freely without anything like that ever happening to us. And I'm not saying it's anywhere analogous to the situation in China, but it is really concerning how there's this sort of creeping authoritarianism in our democratic societies, as we've talked about, and as your show has covered many times. I mean, look at how Hollywood self-censors. Look at how NBA players self-censor just because of the massive power of Chinese money.
Yeah, well, in your case, I mean, it sounds like it's not just an issue of freedom of speech. It also sounds a little like election interference.
Yeah, exactly. It is also potentially like foreign election interference because, I mean, as I said prior as well, there were Chinese state media propagandists who were splicing together basically footage to make out that my protest had been some kind of, hate crime, like just propaganda they were putting out against me. And then they were tagging New South Wales police, asking for New South Wales police to arrest me. And, these guys, some of these state media propagandists were based in Shanghai. They're based in China. I mean, like, how's that not foreign election interference?
Yeah, I mean, clearly you're on the CCP's radar, and I'm sure they wouldn't like it if you're elected.
Yeah, I mean, I've been condemned personally. I mean, how many 22-year-olds in the world? I mean, obviously you get the really brave Hong Kongers like Joshua Wong, Agnes Chow, etc. But I mean, like, it's not that often that young people are directly sort of named and shamed by the CCP, and I'm probably the youngest Australian to ever been condemned personally by like Chinese foreign ministry officials before international press conferences.
Did I mention I'm jealous?
Yes. That was a great highlight in my life because there was even a point.
Stop it.
I don't know if I talked about this on the show with you guys last time, but there was even a point because my family's of Greek Cypriot background. Like, they came to Australia in the 60s and 70s. And the Chinese ambassador to Cyprus, like, wrote a letter to the Chinese press, like an open letter. No, wrote a letter to the Cypriot press, sorry, an open letter, like, addressed to the public, like, basically threatening them and going, like, you don't want to end up like Joshua Wong, Drew Pavlou. And it's like, Joshua Wong, well, yeah, he's been arrested. He's been put in a prison cell. So that's kind of a threat. And then additionally, how crazy is it that, man, I don't speak Greek. I've only been to Cyprus once in my entire life. My parents were born here in Australia. But just because I'm Greek Cypriot background, my family's ethnic background, the Chinese ambassador to Cyprus condemns me by name. I mean, it's such an example of their sort of blood and soil fascist kind of mindset where, man, like, I've always said the Chinese dictatorship right now, it's not really communist. It's basically a fascist dictatorship, I think. It's like an ethno-state where it's based on Han supremacy and other minority groups, etc., are seen as inferior. I mean, what a weird scenario that, like, they come out and the Chinese ambassador to Cyprus attacks me personally just because my family background is Cypriot. I mean, it's bizarre.